Picture this. A vehicle pulls into an empty field. Nothing about it looks unusual at first, just a long, sleek shell rolling to a stop on a gravel road. Then something happens that shouldn't be possible on something with wheels. The roof lifts. Glass walls rise out of nowhere. A balcony unfolds where there was only smooth metal seconds earlier. And somewhere inside, a person steps into an elevator and rides it up to a second floor that did not exist 5 minutes ago. This is not science fiction. This is not a concept render designed to get clicks and never actually built. This is a real motorhome, built in China, and it is quietly making some of the most famous luxury mansions on Earth look a little bit outdated. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how a vehicle got to this point, why it happened in China specifically, and why the entire idea of what a home even means may be changing faster than most people have noticed. Before we go further, if this kind of engineering story interests you, consider subscribing, because we cover machines and innovations like this one regularly, and you will not want to miss what comes next. For most of the last century, the motorhome existed as a compromise. It was never meant to compete with an actual house. It was a box on wheels that let people bring a bed, a stove, and a bathroom with them on a road trip. Comfortable? Sure. Practical? Absolutely. But nobody ever confused a motorhome with a mansion. Nobody stood inside one and thought about architecture, or art, or the kind of design language you'd expect in a 5-star resort. The motorhome had a job, and the job was mobility, not luxury. That assumption held for decades. European manufacturers refined the formula. American brands built bigger, heavier, more powerful versions of the same basic idea. The industry moved forward, but it moved in small steps. A slightly better fridge, a slightly smarter awning, a slide-out section that added a few extra square feet of living space. Nobody was asking whether a motorhome could feel like walking into a boutique hotel suite, because the ceiling on ambition was set by the size of a highway lane and the payload of a diesel engine. Then a shift happened, and it did not come from where the industry expected. China's automotive sector has spent the last decade transforming itself. What used to be seen internationally as a manufacturer of budget vehicles has become one of the most aggressive innovators in electric vehicles, battery technology, and vehicle architecture. Chinese companies started out producing legacy automakers in electric vehicle volume. They started exporting finished cars to markets that used to view made in China with skepticism. And somewhere in that same wave of ambition, engineers turned their attention toward an entirely different category, recreational vehicles built not as an afterthought, but as a flagship showcase of what modern manufacturing and design can actually do. The result is a new generation of Chinese motorhomes that treat the vehicle less like a camper and more like a folding, transportable building. And the flagship example of this shift is a vehicle everyone is now talking about, a luxury motorhome that expands into a 2-story structure complete with a rooftop terrace, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and yes, a working elevator connecting the 2 levels. Let's start with the shape of the thing, because the exterior alone tells you this was not designed by people thinking inside the old rulebook. While it's driving, the vehicle looks streamlined and almost understated, a smooth, aerodynamic profile that would not look out of place parked outside a modern office building. There's no hint from the outside of what the vehicle is capable of once it stops moving. That restraint is intentional. The engineers behind it wanted a machine that behaves like any other high-end coach on the highway, obeying the same aerodynamic and safety logic as anything else on the road, while hiding an entirely different identity underneath the surface. Once parked, the transformation begins, and it happens in stages that feel almost theatrical. First, hydraulic panels along the sides extend outward, widening the ground floor into a living area that would rival a small studio apartment. This isn't a narrow slide-out that adds 18 inches of walking space near a couch. It's a full expansion that turns a cramped hallway-style interior into an open floor plan with distinct zones for cooking, relaxing, and sleeping. Then comes a part that separates this vehicle from virtually everything else in the category. The roof does not stay a roof. Hydraulic lifts raise the entire upper shell of the vehicle, and as it rises, a second floor reveals itself underneath. Walls, flooring, and structural framing that were compressed and hidden during transit, unfolding into a genuine second story. It's the kind of transformation you'd expect from a piece of expandable furniture, except it's happening at the scale of an entire building, and it's happening on top of a vehicle that just spent the day driving on public roads. The second floor is where the vehicle stops resembling a motorhome altogether. Large glass panels form the walls, offering a panoramic, uninterrupted view of the surrounding landscape from an elevated position, well above eye level for anyone standing on the ground outside. Step out onto the attached balcony, and you're no longer inside a vehicle at all in any meaningful sense. You're standing on an open-air platform, several feet above a campsite, forest, or coastline, exactly the way you would on the second-floor balcony of a house. The glass itself deserves its own explanation, because it isn't ordinary glazing. The walls use transparent display technology that can switch between two completely different functions. In its default state, the glass is simply clear. You look through it and see the outside world exactly as you would through any window. But with a flip of a setting, that same glass becomes an active screen, capable of displaying video, ambient lighting effects, or entertainment content directly on the surface you were just looking through. There's no separate television mounted somewhere in the room competing for wall space. The architecture itself becomes a screen when you want it to be a screen, and reverts to being a simple window the moment you don't. And then there's the elevator, arguably the single detail that makes people stop and rewatch this part of the reveal. Rather than a fold-down ladder or a narrow spiral staircase squeezed into a hallway, the vehicle includes a small, fully functional lift connecting the ground floor to the upper level. Press a button, and a compact car quietly carries you up to the second story, the same way it might in a boutique hotel or modern city apartment. It is, as far as publicly available information suggests, the only vehicle in mass production anywhere in the world with this specific feature built directly into a motorhome chassis. Step back and look at everything together. The expanding ground floor, the rising second story, the OLED glass walls, the balcony, and the elevator, and you start to understand why comparisons to actual houses aren't an exaggeration for the sake of a video title. This vehicle isn't trying to be a slightly nicer camper. It's trying to be a small, transportable villa, and by most accounts, it succeeds. What makes this even more remarkable is the price point relative to the rest of the ultra-luxury motorhome market. Elsewhere in the world, vehicles with a fraction of these features, hand-built European coaches with rotating lounges, retractable terraces, or premium cabinetry, routinely sell for well over $1 million, and in some extreme cases climb into the multiple millions once custom features and bespoke interiors are factored in. This new Chinese entry, by contrast, has been positioned at a price that puts it within reach of a much broader segment of buyers, reportedly landing in the range of a well-equipped luxury sedan rather than a private jet. That pricing strategy alone is arguably as disruptive as the engineering itself, because it takes features that used to be reserved for the ultra-wealthy and repositions them for anyone willing to save toward a genuinely premium purchase rather than an unattainable one. It's worth pausing here to talk about why this happened in China specifically, because the answer says a lot about where the entire auto industry is heading. China's manufacturing base has scaled electric vehicle production faster than almost anywhere else on the planet. That scale brings down the cost of batteries, motors, hydraulic systems, and the smart electronics needed to coordinate something as complex as a self-expanding two-story structure. When a country builds enough EVs to become the largest single market in the world, the supply chain supporting that production get cheaper and more capable for everyone building on top of them, including the small, specialized companies pushing the boundaries of what a motorhome can be. There's also a cultural angle worth mentioning. In markets like Europe and North America, motorhome design has followed a fairly conservative evolutionary path for decades, built around established expectations from a customer base that already knows what a proper RV looks like. Chinese manufacturers building in this space have far less legacy baggage to work around. They aren't trying to protect a brand identity built over 50 years of slowly updated floor plans. They are building from a blank sheet of paper, informed by architecture and interior design as much as by traditional vehicle engineering. That freedom shows up directly in vehicles like this one, where the starting question wasn't how do we make a motorhome nicer, but what would happen if we designed a vehicle the way we design a small piece of real estate. Of course, a vehicle this ambitious raises obvious practical questions, and it's worth addressing them honestly rather than pretending a rolling two-story house comes without trade-offs. Weight and stability matter enormously with a design like this. Raising an entire second floor hydraulically requires a chassis and suspension system engineered specifically to handle that kind of structural load, both while parked and while being transported with the upper section retracted. Reliability of the hydraulic and electronic systems becomes a much bigger concern, than it would be in a traditional motorhome, simply because there are more moving parts that all need to work in sync every single time the vehicle transforms. And regulations around vehicle height, width, and road legality vary significantly from country to country, meaning a design like this may need different configurations depending on where it's sold and driven. None of that diminishes what's been accomplished here, but it does explain why a vehicle like this represents a genuine engineering risk as much as a marketing spectacle. Building a folding second story that has survived years of vibration, temperature changes, and repeated deployment cycles is a far harder problem than building a fixed, single-story cabin that never has to move once it's assembled, though it's also worth putting this vehicle in context against the rest of the ultra-luxury motorhome world, because the competition it's up against is not exactly modest. There are motorhomes built with amphibious hulls, capable of driving directly into a lake and continuing forward as a functioning boat. There are motorhomes with retractable garages built into their sides, designed specifically so an owner can transport a supercar safely to a destination and then use the same platform as an outdoor terrace once the car rolls out. There are motorhomes designed by studios more famous for shaping supercars and campers, borrowing curves and proportions straight from motorsport and aviation. And there are motorhomes with fully certified helicopter landing pads on their roofs, built by engineers who spend their earlier careers designing super yachts rather than road vehicles. Against that backdrop, a vehicle that folds out into a two-story structure with a working elevator doesn't just compete. It introduces an entirely new category that none of those other vehicles occupy. The amphibious motorhome answers a question: what if a vehicle could also be a boat? The supercar-carrying motorhome answers: what if a vehicle could also be a garage? This new Chinese design answers a much bigger question: what if a vehicle could also be a house? And it answers that question more literally and more completely than anything that came before it. There's a broader trend hiding underneath this one vehicle, and it's worth zooming out to see it clearly. As remote work becomes more normalized, and as more people reconsider what home actually needs to mean, the appeal of a genuinely livable, genuinely mobile structure keeps growing. A decade ago, the idea of living full-time in a vehicle was associated almost entirely with retirees on extended road trips or budget-conscious travelers looking to save on rent. Today, that same idea is being reconsidered by people who simply want the freedom to relocate without giving up the comfort, space, and design quality they'd expect from a permanent home. Vehicles like this one are a direct response to that shift in expectations. They are not trying to convince people to accept less space in exchange for mobility. They are trying to prove that mobility and genuine comfort don't have to be in conflict at all.